Hi everyone, Al the Psych here. Got a video, it's going to be a long one, so I might take a little break in between while I'm working on the video. My title is Research Problems and Expert Opinions. Now, again, for informational purposes only, most of the sources come from Standard Deviations, a book by Gary Smith from 2014. Bad Science from Ben Goldacre, 2008. How to Read a Paper, The Basics of Evidence-Based Medicine, 5th edition. This is from Tricia Greenhalgh, 2014. Hopefully I said her name right. And then a research article, The MMR Vaccine and Autism, Sensation, Refutation, Retraction, and Fraud, 2011. Okay, so like I said, it's going to be a long one. I'm going to do a lot of reading from my notes. There's a lot of information here. If you're interested in research, this kind of goes over research when sometimes there's actually a problem. Okay, so from Standard Deviation, just some of the little notes that I took from it. Like Gary Smith writes, he says, the problem is not that we don't have enough data, but that we are misled by what we have in front of us. And we are too easily seduced by patterns and by the theories that explain them. So we might have a lot of data, but sometimes the explanation of that data can be faulty. Okay? And we tend to maybe latch on to data that support our theories and discount contradicting evidence. Okay, kind of sounds like confirmation bias to me. So we might believe stories simply because they're consistent with the patterns we observe. And once we have a story, we're kind of reluctant to let them go. Now, he kind of gives an interesting example here. He says, when you keep rolling sevens at the craps table, you believe you're on a hot streak, and because you just think you want to just keep on winning. But when you keep throwing snake eyes, you believe you're due for a win because you want to start winning. Interesting way of looking at things. Now, another interesting thing, and I think applies to research, and we need to maybe apply this to our everyday lives. On this example, it's a good one. If we're told that kids who play competitive sports are confident, we shouldn't assume that playing competitive sports builds confidence. It may be that confident kids like to play competitive sports. So which came first? Okay, so you don't want to necessarily fall into that trap that you hear sometimes. And Simpsons Paradox, I really liked this one. A pattern in an aggregated data is reversed when the data are disaggregated. So Cal Berkeley had a lawsuit in the 1970s regarding sexual admission bias, and females were admitted at a lower rate. But what was happening is that they were applying for departments with lower admission rates. Men were applying for departments with higher admission rates. Now, you wouldn't know that from looking at the aggregate data, but when it was broken down, when you really looked into all the intricacies of the data, you found that women applied, at that time anyway, applied to more selective programs. So, the acceptance rate was going to be lower. The men were applying to basically programs that were accepting more individuals. So sometimes we look at something and we get the overall picture, and maybe we get a distorted view of what's actually happening. Sometimes we have to do a little bit more digging to get the correct information. I thought that was very important. Okay, let me look a little bit now at Bad Science. This is the one from Ben Goldacre. Interesting, he says Linus Pauling, remember him from vitamin C fame? He said selectively chose the literature to prove his point about vitamin C. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that he did this consciously. He could have just been falling under confirmation bias, which is what everybody does to some degree. A lot of information under confirmation bias. I've even got a video on it if you want to read about it. We go back to 1946. You know, this video also talks about expert opinions. In 1946, Dr. Spock, the baby doctor, Dr. Spock and his colleagues recommended that infants should sleep on their stomach. And, you know, it made sense what he was thinking. He was thinking that, you know, if the kids threw up, they could, you know, choke on their vomitus. But basically, that was wrong advice, as we found out later. Unfortunately, you know, the repercussions were that advice were not good. Some examples of some harmful practices that were once strongly supported by expert opinion. Bloodletting. Bloodletting actually started, at least according to this book, from about 500 BC, just for about any acute illness. And it didn't actually stop till 1910. I had no idea about that, but that's what it says. And then in 1957, thalidomide was the morning sickness medicine, and led to a lot of birth defects. You know, again, that was, you know, handed out by the experts. And from at least 1900 and up until even 1986, many doctors were still recommending rest for acute low back pain. Now, we can get into the 1960s and benzodiazepines, like diazepam. That was for mild anxiety, insomnia, and it was initially marketed as non-addictive. Okay, and we all know that's not the case now. It actually can cause severe dependence, and you get withdrawal symptoms, things like that. This I didn't know about. Late 1990s, COX-2 inhibitors. It's a new class of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs introduced for the treatment of arthritis. They were later shown to increase the risk of heart attack and stroke. And finally, from that book, 90% of, and he wrote this book back in 2008, I don't know what the percentage is today, but 90% of clinical drug trials are conducted or commissioned by the pharmaceutical industry. So there might be a tendency to interpret findings in a favorable light. Now, let me be clear, you know, much of what the pharmaceutical industry has been, what they've done, you know, has significantly improved and prolonged lives as well. You know, so in my mind, I'm giving you my opinion, I've got kind of a push-pull, love-hate sort of scenario going with the pharmaceutical industry, but they've done some great things. On the other hand, some things have not turned out so well. Now, I'm getting to the book called How to Read a Paper, and this is a tough read. Okay, I was never a big fan of research and statistics and research methods and all of that, but I had some background on it. I had, you know, as I did my dissertation and all. But this is not an easy read. I've gone through it a couple of quick times, and I still need to go back over it just to get the gist of it. And I'm going to try and give you a little bit of that. So it talks about some of the things that you know, needs to be done in terms of research to have good research. And she, you know, she says, okay, You want to know, was the trial randomized and controlled, and was it done correctly, and how many patients, what age, sex, disease severity were involved. You know, who's the study, or who is the study about? Very important here. How many withdrew from, dropped out of the study, and why? Were preliminary statistical questions addressed? Was this reported accurately in the findings? You know, there's been studies where, because of the dropout rate, this particular treatment might look like a very good treatment, but if you added in the people that dropped out, it might not look so good. Okay, so that's real important. And then what's the criteria that patients judged cured were? So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered when looking at research. Okay, and this book really goes into detail if you want to try and tackle it. Okay, I'm going to take just a quick break, and I will be right back.